In 2012 in Nebraska, USA, a love triangle led to a bizarre and deadly series of events involving a missing person, a relentless campaign of stalking and harassment, a shooting, arson, and a murder trial with no body. A 4-year police investigation would uncover a plot to remove a love rival at any cost and end with a terrifying twist. This is what happens when a woman scorned will do whatever it takes to get what she wants. This is the case of Shanna Golyar. Hi, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for joining me. Today's case is one of those that is properly blindsiding. Literally, we have all been in scenarios where we are jealous. We've all been in situations where we haven't exactly got what we want. But usually, the lens that we will go to address the balance is something minimal in reality. We accept, for example, when people may not like us. We adjust our behavior and move through our lives, accepting that the world shouldn't be a perfect place just for us. But it really feels like today's case is an example of an individual who cannot accept reality and just how far they will go to try to alter that reality, even at the greatest cost of all. We're going to go back to 2012. Nebraska, USA is where this begins. We've got 36-year-old David Krupa. Now, he's a garage manager. He'd recently separated from his long-term partner, Amy Flora, and they'd actually had 2 children together. I would say, from what I've understood about that breakup, it had been very amicable. They'd kind of grown apart. Amy actually lived near to David in Omaha, Nebraska with the kids. So they had a co-parenting situation. Now, as time progresses, David decides he's going to join a dating site. Obviously, when you are single in the modern era, this is a place that you will go to find love or hookups or fun or whatever it is. The world has moved on these days. Digital transformation includes digital dating. So that's what he does. Gets in contact with 37-year-old Shanna Elizabeth Golyar. Now, she is a single mum of 2 kids, so obviously they have something in common. And apparently he was really attracted to her straight away. They begin dating. It's very complex these days, guys, though, isn't it? Dating isn't how it was when I was young, where somebody basically asked you out, and then if you got on the first date, you were just in a relationship. That was how it worked. Now it's a whole heap of different things. Since the year 2000, it's so much more complex. There's the seeing people online, talking, speaking. That's another part of it where you're actually speaking on a more exclusive level to somebody. Then, of course, there's the meeting. And I don't know, 100 years after, there's the actual solidified monogamous dating. It takes a long time these days. But essentially, they do start dating, and even though it's not exclusive, because David says he just really wants to keep things casual, just come out of a long-term relationship. He wants the idea of, I don't know, picking and mixing, dating other women. Not going to pretend I don't really get it. Just don't understand the whole dating multiple people. But at the end of the day, it's very common. So Golyar, she really is looking for more of a commitment, and that is typical of women. I know that everybody is about liberation and being an individual who's empowered and just is happy to go and be with anyone at any time. But actually, when we look at research psychologically, women are relational beings. So it makes sense that a lot of individual females want to have commitment. That's really important to them. But nonetheless, even though she's looking for that, she decides that she's going to go along and let David have a non-exclusive relationship whatsoever. So I suppose we can suggest that she is somebody who's obviously very interested in him and will compromise her own beliefs and desires and wants to achieve a presence with him and in his life. Now we get to October 2012, and David at this point is still dating Golyar when he actually comes across 37-year-old Carrie Lee Farver. She actually brings her car into his garage for maintenance, and David recalled that basically immediately there was this spark. They were basically standing close to each other, and there was this kind of tension that he felt was connecting. So he just took the confident stance and asked her on a date, and she agreed. So they agreed to go for a meal. Now, Carrie is actually a single mum. So she's living with a teenage son, Max, in Macedonia, Iowa. She was very, very bright. She was working as a computer programmer, and she was very good at this particular role. And with respect, even though women are working in STEM and computing, it is a lot less usual for a female to be operating in that space. So she's obviously multifaceted and she's very academic. Now, their first date was on the 29th of October 2012. They go to a restaurant in Omaha and they really had a good time. They enjoyed each other's company, but what was clearly on the minds of both of them is that they wanted to keep things casual. So she had her commitments, he had his commitments, and essentially, even though they really like each other, he and she decide that this isn't about looking for the one. It's more about having a good time. Now, during that very day, David actually starts receiving loads of calls, loads of texts from Golyar. He tries to ignore them, but they just don't stop. So in the end, he actually contacts Golyar and says, look, I'm on a date. I can't speak to you. Which, with respect, don't get me wrong, I appreciate. I am long in the tooth and I'm of an age where dating has, as I said, progressed to a whole new paradigm and universe of what feels like massive disappointment. But for me, if I was like loosely dating some guy and I have been for a while and I'm like calling him and in the end he's like, hey, don't call me. Why? Why can't I call you? I keep calling you, keep ignoring me. That's because I'm on a date with another woman. It would be gut-wrenching. With respect, I don't care how prepared you are to know that the guy that you are seeing might dabble elsewhere, but when you have that confirmed, all those hopes and dreams of it all working out in the long term just dissipate and you're left just feeling a little bit used. I appreciate you're grown up, you've agreed to this situation, but how often do we agree to situations when really we want a different outcome? So for Golyar, it's going to be galling without a doubt. And hearing that from him is going to feel abandoning as well. Now, after the meal's finished, David and Carrie go back to his apartment. They hadn't been there a very long time, and then the intercom buzzed. So he went to the apartment building security door and he finds Golyar standing there. She's really upset. She's crying and she says that she wants to collect some things from his apartment. I, at this point, have quite a lot of empathy and sympathy with her. She probably feels like a fool and she's just thinking, right, I'm going to let him know how upset I am and I'm going to go and get my stuff because basically, I don't know, I want him to be set on fire in my head several times to just manage this situation. Now, David, he asks her to stay by the door, which again is not going to be the best movement, David, is it? Because with respect, she will have been in that place intimately with him a lot of times. And now she's come to get her stuff because she's found out he's dating some other woman. She's upset by this. She wants to collect her things and he's like, just don't come in. You cannot cross the boundary. Imagine you're a character from Salem's Lot, just like the vampires, like Danny Glick, has to stay outside, can't come in. You're going to be upset. Because it's like, wow, not only am I realizing that our intimacy has not actually meant that much, you've also got this clear boundary where I'm being almost treated like an imposition, and that can be really upsetting. So he says, stay by the door. Then he goes back to Carrie and he has to explain that situation to Carrie. And Carrie actually decides that she's not going to stay. She leaves, and as she exits the building, obviously she passes Golyar at the security door. Now, Golyar watches as Carrie gets into her black Ford Explorer and drives away. So she obviously at this point knows that she's interrupted that date. And I would imagine for Carrie it's a very difficult situation as well. But arguably, Carrie has also agreed with David to keep things casual. So she's probably prepared for that to some degree. Now, Golyar, she collects her belongings from David's apartment at this point. Then he asks her to leave. So again, she's going to be feeling really quite upset about that situation playing out. Once she's gone, once she's got her belongings and left, David then calls Carrie and then ends up traveling to her apartment in Iowa, and he spends the night there. So ultimately in that moment, it feels like there's been a little bit of a choice made, and that he's chosen Carrie, whether that's on a non-exclusive level or otherwise. There's something about her that just connects. Now, during the next 2 weeks after that initial date, David and Carrie see each other a lot. And he's really surprised because they have an amazing connection. But as they agreed, they keep it really casual. And actually, during that period of time, David does manage to keep seeing Golyar. So even though they've had that altercation, she's collected her stuff and clearly has demonstrated that she's not happy about this situation. Even though you would imagine that would be enough to cut it off, she's obviously gone away and reconsidered whether she wants to have him in her life, and decided that she can manage that situation, albeit knowing that it isn't perfect for her. Now, in the second week of November 2012, Carrie's vehicle gets damaged. It gets damaged with spray paint. Apparently it seemed that it was like a random act of vandalism. There wasn't a culprit who actually got caught. Now, around the same time as this is all happening, she arranged to stay with David at his apartment for a week. And the reason for that is that she's involved in a project at her workplace in Omaha, which isn't actually far from David's apartment. So this meant that she'd be doing some late nights. Made sense because they're getting on, that she can stay at his and then she can commute from there. She'd even arranged for her son to stay with her parents. So it's all organised. And when you're in a situation where you fancy somebody and you're getting on really well and you're building the very initial stages of a relationship, however that's going to work out, it is really exciting to have a specific amount of time afforded you where you've not necessarily got your common responsibilities and you can just enjoy each other. So I imagine that she was really looking forward to that. So after finishing work on Monday, the 12th of November 2012, she returns to David's apartment, spends the night there. Following morning, David gets up as he always does, leaves for work, and he leaves quite early. It's around 6:20 a.m. that he actually leaves his property. Carrie, she gets on with a few tasks on her laptop, and then she sets off for work not long after. Now, bear in mind, as far as David is concerned, he and Carrie are getting on like a house on fire. They're really connecting. And he is absolutely blindsided when suddenly her behaviour just becomes increasingly more and more bizarre. So at 9:54 a.m. that morning, the morning where they've had a night together, it's been lots of fun, she's going to be staying with him, etc., she unfriends him on Facebook. We all know when you unfollow somebody on social media, basically the message is clear. I never want to see you again. You know, it's a really powerful thing, isn't it? I mean, when a celebrity unfollows another celebrity, it will just get all over the press because it's a very clear statement, isn't it? You are no longer in my circle of trust. So he notices that. But then at 10 a.m, he gets this text off her. And the text, in spite of the fact that she's just unfriended him on Facebook, asks him if he wants her to move in with him on a permanent basis. Now, bear in mind, they've had all these conversations about the fact that this isn't going to be too severe and serious, and it's not going to be all about their commitment. It's actually been quite casual. And now she's asking to move in with him. So he replies politely and says, you know what? No, I'm not really interested at this moment in time, having known you for a few weeks, to actually commit to you. And he is stunned, because her response is pretty damn severe. So he ends up receiving this really angry message, basically telling him he's a terrible person, it's over, and she was going to start seeing someone else, which seems like a massive escalation. I mean, we've all had bad days. We've all had bad days where somebody has done something or said something, we've reacted on text, and 15 minutes later thought, not sure that was the right thing to do, particularly to my boss. But at the end of the day, we've all been there, right? But for him, it just is so out of context. And bear in mind, they've been really building something fun and he's really enjoying it. It turns out David never sees Carrie again. But my God, It certainly would not be the last time that he heard from her. So we've got Carrie texting him, letting him know all these feelings that are obviously about him being an awful human being. But also, the same day, Carrie's mother, Nancy Rainey, she gets a really surprising text from Carrie. And Carrie states that she's found a new job in Kansas. Even asks her parents to look after her son until she's settled. Now, this is all absolutely 100% out of the blue. So when her mother messages Carrie, questioning her what she's actually doing, sorry, Carrie, I seem to have got a text here that suggests that you're not coming back because you've got a new job in Kansas. Where has this happened? What is going on? Which you would imagine immediately doing, particularly when you're saying, by the way, could you just keep my child? Just keep my child. It'll be fine. So she's really, really worried, and she sends questions saying, what are you doing? Gets no response whatsoever. And bear in mind, this is massively out of character for Carrie. She's in contact with her mother every single day. They have a really close relationship. That's why Carrie is trusting her son to stay there when she's meant to be going away for a week to work. Bear in mind, on top of this, Carrie actually fails to show up at work that day. She doesn't give an explanation. And this is somebody who is meticulous. As a worker, she's excellent at what she does. She's a reliable human being. She's a devoted, committed mother. So this all feels really odd. So even though she doesn't turn up for work, again, there is this excuse that rolls in on the 15th of November 2012, and they get a text from her. And that text is her resignation. And she actually says that she's going to send somebody else to replace her. And you know who turns up to replace her? None other than Shanna Golyar. Right, literally. How bizarre is that? Golyar actually ends up completing an online job application. So this is a really strange turn of events. Now, Carrie's family are absolutely devastated because they can't speak to her. She's not getting back to them apart from through text. But what they do notice is on the 16th of November 2012, she does actually buy a few items on her debit card. And obviously that's really important because when the police are looking at signs of life of missing people, that's one of the first places they go. They look at their banks. They figure out whether there has been any activity, because usually if there hasn't been activity, it's something really dire that's occurred. But there is. So she's bought a shower curtain and it's got this really distinctive black and white floral pattern. And you can imagine them being even more confused because that's actually an item for a house, and she said that she's moving somewhere else, and you can imagine that that kind of fits in with the possibilities, and they're not going to have their fears allayed, but it's probably going to cause more questions than answers. Now, when Carrie's mother sees that these debits have occurred, she starts to feel ultimately as if she needs to get answers, so she reports her missing that day. But the police genuinely don't take her concerns too seriously, which is mind-blowing. This is a mother who's devoted, she's a great worker, she's never done this before. Why on earth would the police not immediately think, this is really odd, it's so out of context? So a mother actually explains that Carrie has been diagnosed as bipolar in the past, but she'd stopped taking medication a long time ago and she was in a really good place. So the police do what really frustrates me. When somebody goes into a police station to say, my daughter is missing, her movements are not consistent with what we're used to, her habits and behaviours online and on the phone are nothing like what we're used to, we're deeply concerned about her safety, she's resigned from a job, and this is apparently a mythical job in Kansas that we can't understand, and we've got her son, can you please take this seriously? And they go, oh well, she's bipolar, she's probably just having some kind of erratic reality occur. Like, two things. One, that is not going to make sense. Families really understand the patterns of the people that they love. There was no causation for her to leave. Secondly, let's just say, using their ridiculous suggestion that something had happened where she needed to act erratically because of her mind state, you should straight away be putting out calls and notices in case she was in distress. Either way, not taking it seriously and not doing very much about it is certainly not the appropriate way to deal with it. And days, hours, minutes are massively important when somebody disappears. Now, meanwhile, even though she isn't seen anywhere, Carrie is continuing to actually make posts on Facebook. She's sending messages via her Facebook account. And simultaneously, David and Golyar, they begin to start getting some really threatening emails and texts from Carrie. In fact, they were inundated with them. David would receive up to 160 a day. And the text came from, they believe, as many as 30 different phone numbers. Also, lots of different emails from a similar number of email accounts, and all were variations of Carrie's name. And they were horrible. They were threats that included things like, I hate you so much that I want to drive a knife into your heart, and I will destroy your life and take your happiness. So David is blindsided by this. He keeps changing his phone number, but it makes literally no difference. Meanwhile, Golyar's getting messages as well, and they include things like, if you don't keep your hands or lips off my man, I'll hurt you. And in the messages, Carrie is frequently referring to Golyar as a whore. So these are really nasty messages and would be deeply upsetting. But the harassment does not just take the form of messages. So between November 2012 and April 2013, Golyar's property is actually vandalised on 3 occasions. And on one occasion, inside of the garage, was spray painted with the words, whore from Dave. And she speaks to the police and says, listen, there is only one person I believe would be doing this and have the motivation to do this to me, and that would be Carrie. Also, David's property is vandalised, as was the garage where he works. And soon after each of these attacks on the property, Carrie would actually contact them and claim responsibility, which would be absolutely horrifying. The idea that there is somebody stalking you essentially and waiting for opportunities to cause damage to yourselves and your lives, it would make you feel constantly like you need to look over your shoulder. And bear in mind, for David, this is going to be absolutely shocking because he'd met Carrie, it had been going well, and then she's turned into something that he wouldn't be able to recognize. And it must have been a terrifying, disconcerting experience. And even more worryingly, David literally received messages that indicated Carrie was watching him. In one message, it read, my favorite thing to do is stand outside and stare at you. And she would even describe what he was doing, what he was wearing at the exact moment. And at first he's really suspicious because he's thinking, listen, Golyar is here with me. She knows what I'm wearing. Maybe she's sending the messages, because he tended to get those messages when she was present. But he actually made a point of checking when he got them, and she was never using her phone at the time he received them. Also, Golyar would receive these threatening messages from Carrie around the same time. The harassment was absolutely incessant. Now, I guess some people would say that because David and Golyar were going through this similar experience and they kind of connect over their now mutual dislike and fear of Carrie and this bizarre behaviour that's playing out, they kind of get closer. So we get to January 2013, and this is really strange. David spots Carrie's car in a car park near his apartment, but there's no sign of Carrie. So a crime scene technician comes out, examines the vehicle, obviously for fingerprints, but the vehicle's just really, really clean, maybe a little bit too clean. In fact, the only fingerprints that were found were on a container of mints. But when they went through the FBI database to check any criminal connections, they didn't find a match. So whoever actually owned those fingerprints remained a complete mystery to them. Also, we have Carrie's family, of course. They are absolutely terrified about the potential of what's happened to their daughter, because she doesn't do this. She doesn't go missing, and she misses pivotal events. So she misses her son's 15th birthday and her father's funeral. You can understand that Nancy, and mother, cannot wrap her head around her loving daughter doing this. And Nancy actually ends up getting a message, really brief, where she's apologising for not being there. Nancy replies, stating that she would only believe it was her daughter messaging if she could hear her voice, which is very fair enough. Clearly, why would you be sending me these messages? If you've got something to say, at least validate it's you saying it. So clearly Nancy and her family are very aware that this does not feel like their daughter. But Carrie never calls. And again, I imagine that reinforces for Nancy the fact that something very problematic has potentially occurred. Nancy even starts receiving messages from Carrie accusing her of being a bad mother, being too controlling. And that, to some degree, again, isn't in context with their relationship. It doesn't make sense. And also the messages are full of spelling mistakes, full of grammatical errors. Bear in mind, Carrie is a very bright woman. This is completely out of character for her. And Carrie's son also is desperately trying to get in touch with his mum, and he messages her on her Facebook account. And after she replies, he actually says, I want you to answer 3 questions to prove that it's you. He never received a response. So very clever, because he's not going to buy into the BS if somebody else is potentially getting in contact with him. He wants to have confirmation, so he asks specific questions that only his mother would know. And the fact that nobody gets back to him with the answers to those questions is going to absolutely compact the already suspicious reality of what the family are enduring. So we get to August 2013. Now at this point, Golyar and David split up. Now, soon after that breakup on the 17th of August 2013, Golyar actually arrives back home to discover there's been a fire. And it is a tragedy because 4 of her pets, including her 2 beloved dogs and a cat, had actually perished in the fire. Now, when the investigators get there, from the get-go, they know it's really suspicious. It hadn't been an accident. And the fire had actually been started in 6 different places. Also, an accelerant had been used. Now, this is terrifying, of course. Somebody's literally tried to burn down Golyar's home. And then she receives this email from Carrie. And Carrie's claiming responsibility for the fire. And it said she hoped that Golyar and her children burned to death. Meanwhile, David also receives an email from Carrie. And this is what it reads. I'm not lying. I set that nasty whore's house on fire. I hope the whore and her kids die in it. David and Golyar were really shocked by what happened. And whether, again, that's an event that kind of draws them back together, or whether it's that there's just unfinished business between the 2 of them, they actually end up getting back together pretty soon after that. Now, it turns out that David and Golyar aren't the only ones receiving threatening messages from Carrie. Amy, David's ex, mother of his children, she starts receiving them. She starts getting texts and Facebook messages, and they kind of all insinuate that she's being watched. Now, Amy's never even met Carrie, and she's not been romantically involved with David since they separated. It feels at this moment in time that Carrie has a vendetta against literally anybody who's been anywhere near David in an intimate way, even those who obviously have no connection for him romantically at all. It doesn't matter. If you've historically been involved with him, you are a threat. Now we get to mid-November 2015 and David breaks up with Golyar again. So apparently he'd met somebody else. He was feeling a little bit more committed and serious to this relationship, which must have been, again, galling for Golyar, because she's been hanging around, hasn't she, for a long time, probably thinking, please, just be serious. Give me a white dress and a ring. Because that's clearly her intention. She's been around him for a very long time. And it's a couple of weeks after this, Golyar actually starts receiving harassing messages from David's ex, Amy. So suddenly, Amy is starting to be really aggressive in Golyar's direction. So she ends up notifying the police and she says, look, I have this really awful suspicion. I don't think it was Carrie who's actually been harassing me. I don't think she's the person harassing David all this time either. I think it was Amy. I think it is his ex-wife. And I've been convinced because of these text messages and because of these Facebook messages that this has been Carrie all along. But when I think about it, it has the hallmarks more of Amy. So the police at this point say, okay, well, listen, we're going to help you, but part of what we need is your phone, because we want to download all the data from your cell phone, and that way we can look at all the messages ourselves and absolutely understand who is sending these. So Golyar agrees, And the police then confirm that they're going to go and actually speak to Amy. But curiouser and curiouser, because that weekend, things take an even more serious turn. So after receiving even more harassing messages from Amy, Golyar's at the park in Council Bluffs, Iowa, when she is shot in the leg by Amy. When the officers arrive, they find Golyar sitting alongside her vehicle in the car park, and she's got this bullet wound to her left thigh. Now, bear in mind, there are no other vehicles in the car park, but Golyar said, yeah, there might not be any cars now, but it was Amy that shot me. So now the police are dealing with a potential murder, essentially. So by late January 2016, Golyar actually contacts the police, and I'll tell you why, because she feels that the police are not taking her seriously. Amy has not been arrested over the shooting. She's had her life put at risk by this woman. She's been harassed and threatened for such a long time. And now she's been in a situation where she's told the police, shown the police her injury, and they've not actually done anything with it. She also said to the police, I'm also getting loads more harassing messages from her in between what happened to me and now. Now the police say, listen, appreciate your frustration. We understand your fear, but we have processes to go through and we need to get more evidence before we actually make the arrest. And they actually say to her, look, this is an unusual plan, but it would really help if we could get Amy to open up about her possible involvement in Carrie's disappearance. Because obviously, if Amy is harassing you and has been using Carrie's technology, getting in contact with people pretending to be her, we're concerned about what Amy might have done to Carrie. So Golyar actually agrees, and she obviously feels that this is a potential route to have Amy brought to justice. And it's not long after then that she starts receiving more menacing messages from Amy. But this time, the messages are about Carrie. Now, bear in mind, we're at a point where Carrie hasn't been seen for over 3 years. That's since November 2012. But now, Golyar is receiving emails from Amy that finally reveal exactly what happened to her. And in them, Amy confesses to murdering Carrie, even describes in detail how she killed her, how she'd stabbed Carrie in the chest and her stomach in her own car, how she'd watched her slowly bleed to death as she begged for her life. And then once she'd killed Carrie, she cleaned the car up. She wrapped Carrie's body in tarpaulin and burned it and threw the remains in a bin. Then she went on to say that she'd impersonated Carrie, sending harassing messages to Golyar and David. And Amy also claimed that she'd broken into Carrie's property after the killing. She was even able to accurately describe the interior. And one message also described a yin-yang tattoo, which was on Carrie's left hip. And that had never been disclosed to the public. In fact, only the murderer would know that that particular mark existed. And Amy actually stated that this was to prove, I am not lying about offing that crazy bitch. Some of the other messages were also horrific. They said, I attacked her with a knife. I stabbed her 3 to 4 times in her chest and stomach area. I then took her out and burned her. I killed her because she wouldn't leave me alone. I even went out to her place to get some of her clothes and other things to make it look like she ran away. In the emails, Amy also admitted to setting fire to Golyar's property and to shooting her in the leg. And this, obviously, seems like an open and shut case. Finally, the police have a confession. Amy has admitted to Carrie's murder. She's sent the messages. They've got it all in writing. She's admitted to the arson, to the shooting. It's case closed. She's banged to rights. But the investigators actually had no intention of arresting Amy. New detectives had recently taken over the case, and they suspected their main player, their main suspect, the person that they believed was responsible for all of this, wasn't Carrie. She wasn't this crazed stalker that she appeared to be, nor was it Amy, who is now apparently the individual who's caused all of this distress. In fact, they didn't believe that Carrie was the person doing this because they believed she was dead. Her bank accounts hadn't been used for 3 years. Family hadn't seen or spoken to her. This is a woman who'd had an amazing job, a great life, a child that she adored. Everything was perfect. Her disappearance had never made sense whatsoever. But the reality is, they also don't feel that Amy has any reason to be doing what she's doing. But the main suspect that they feel absolutely has motive is Golyar. They believe that Golyar had killed Carrie, and that she was also the person sending the threatening messages to David and threatening messages to Amy and even to herself. When the detectives had actually asked her to reach out to Amy, she had no idea that she was their main suspect. They were convinced that she was pretending to be Amy all the while. They wanted to see if she could give details of Carrie's murder that only the killer would know. And she had fallen deeply into their trap. Now detectives just needed proof of their suspicions. So when they'd actually requested a download of Golyar's phone, because they'd done it on the ruse of wanting to search evidence against Amy, they'd actually been hoping to find evidence that incriminated Golyar. And they hadn't been disappointed. Data from Golyar's phone indicated that just days before Carrie had vanished, in November 2012, Golyar had made 6 calls to her landline. Yet they'd only briefly met once, just as Carrie passed her at David's apartment. Why would Golyar have called her this many times? Investigators also found a photograph of Carrie's Ford Explorer on Golyar's phone. That was taken more than a month after Carrie had vanished, and weeks before the vehicle was even discovered near David's apartment in January 2013. How did she know of the vehicle's whereabouts before the police? Meanwhile, in September 2015, the police had finally discovered who the fingerprints found in Carrie's car belonged to. They were Golyar's. So the car was re-examined in February 2016, and this time they actually removed the fabric from the car seats, and beneath the front passenger seat, a large red patch was found, and it proved to be a match for Carrie's blood, corroborating the fact that she'd been killed in her car. You can't imagine that moment for Carrie's family when they have confirmation of their deepest and worst fears just being validated, knowing that all of their concerns right from the get-go were completely correct. And over 3 years after their much-loved family member had disappeared, they're realizing that she didn't leave of her own volition and accord. As they always suspected, she was actually a victim in a heinous murder. Also, investigators were now able to prove that all those harassing messages that had been sent to people were not from Carrie or Amy, because a digital forensic examiner was able to link the multitude of email accounts from which the messages had been sent to Golyar. That was based on the IP addresses and devices that were used to send them. As time passed, Golyar had actually got pretty effective at doing this in a way that would have hoped, in her mind, to prevent her being recognised as the sender. So she'd used a lot of different software in an attempt to disguise her IP address. But it was also established she'd managed to find an app, and that app would send pre-composed messages at scheduled times, which is why David would often get a message when she was present and not using her phone, and therefore think, well, it can't possibly be her sending them because I'm getting them when she's literally sat next to me and she's not on her phone. So she was quite effective at creating this ruse, according to the investigators. And the fact that she was describing in those messages what he was wearing, what he was doing, again, because he was with Golyar and she was present without a phone, that must have genuinely felt like he was being watched. Now, it transpires that from the very outset, Golyar was completely obsessed with David. And her main motivation was, if I can't have him, you can't have him. In fact, she was so insidious with her jealousy, so consumed with rage about other women having any access to him, that this literally took over her life. She wanted him for herself, and she was literally prepared to do anything to get him, even kill. She'd seen Carrie, and she'd considered her immediately as a love rival. So she killed her. And then she pretended to be her for 3 years. I mean, each time things cooled off with David, what would she do? She'd just conveniently be a victim again of an act of vandalism supposedly by Carrie, and no doubt you'd have David feeling guilty because he was, of course, the individual who had connected these two strangers, having horrific ramifications on Golyar's life. So this is used to reconnect them. Bear in mind, this woman had gone so far as to set fire to her own property, killing her pets in the process. Now, I am just a little bit triggered because of the fact that when you consider a human being, when you have pets, I am a bit obsessive, got 4 dogs, 2 cats, 2 rescue squirrels. At the end of the day, my animals are kind of a massive part of my life. I'm not saying they are as important as my children. They're just one small step down because they are my family. They are the individuals in my life I wish to protect. The idea of causing them harm is so outside the realm of rationality for me. Even if I had somebody pointing a gun to my head and they suggested that I harm one of my animals, I would end up getting shot. I just cannot do that. Hey, I don't eat animals, so clearly I have a connection with that sentience. To destroy my own animals, to create a ruse for me being seen as a victim, that is so psychopathic. Genuinely, think about what we see in serial killers' childhoods when they harm animals. The reality is we don't expect people, particularly people who are looking after their pets, to ever want to bring them to harm. It goes against the grain, but that's what she does. She burns them to death. That in itself demonstrates her egocentricity, her narcissism, her ability to put herself in the first place and not care about anybody else, to do whatever it takes to get the man that she's decided she deserves. And in a weird way, those actions reinforce further actions because David gets back with her. So it's a sacrifice as far as she is concerned that's worth making. Investigators were absolutely stunned that she went that far in her deception. And I agree with those investigators. You do not expect somebody to actually act in that manner, no matter how desperate they are to reconnect with somebody. But another thing that blows their mind is, yeah, hey, she's killed her own animals, burnt her own house down to some degree, but she literally shoots herself in the leg to continue this pretense. So obviously we know that's an attempt to frame David's ex, Amy, but she could have seriously damaged herself, and it's worth taking that risk, literally shooting herself. And David had actually brought a gun because he'd been getting all of these threatening messages, and that gun, surprisingly, had disappeared. Just disappeared from his apartment. I mean, he'd reported it missing with respect, but you know, you're going to be sitting there going, I don't know, I had that gun, didn't I? That dangerous item of a firearm that could cause serious and significant damage, and it's gone. It's got, where did I put it? I lose my keys, I lose my wallet, I lose my gun. The difference is my gun's gone. You know, at this point, I'd be seriously concerned, particularly with all the stuff that was going on around threatening messages. I wouldn't be losing my gun and not getting it back. I'd be moving. Probably to another state, maybe after spending my life savings on plastic surgery to make me look like a slightly different human being because I'd be scared for my life. But you know, what's the coincidence in this? Golyar gets shot in the leg not long after that gun goes walkabout. Now, following that shooting, of course, the police had been told it was Amy. They go to her address, she answers the door to find, and bear in mind, this is a woman, a mother, who's done absolutely nothing wrong. She's not involved in the fantasy of this woman who's completely delusional about what she's willing to do for the man of her dreams. So Amy answers that door, and there are officers literally pointing guns in her face. Now, apparently she was really cooperative with the police, which she would be. They're pointing guns in your face. You're not going to be like, hold up, I'm just going to fight you. At the end of the day, you are going to be massively compliant. They wouldn't even have to ask me to put my hands behind my head and literally lie on the floor. I would just do it immediately when confronted by said individuals. She's really cooperative, of course she is. She's done nothing wrong. She's not a psychopathic, narcissistic killer. And it's news to her what she's being essentially accused of. Doesn't take more than about, I don't know, 35 seconds to discover that firstly, Amy is certainly not a killer. Secondly, she's got a massively sound alibi. She could not possibly have carried out the shooting. And on top of that, the thing about Golyar is she's very consistent. So those accounts of the shooting, they don't necessarily coincide with reality because they keep changing significantly every time she's asked about it. So they just don't seem possibly to be based in experience because they are completely distinct every time she tells a story. So immediately, these are investigators. They're used to working with innocent people. They're used to working with guilty people. And she is coming across as 100% guilty. And investigators pretty immediately felt that Golyar had shot herself. Now, bear in mind, at this point, they, as a police force, want to look at the communication that's been going on between potentially Golyar and the other phones involved. So they get consent to download David and Amy's mobile phones. And they find out again that many of these harassing emails to David, allegedly from Carrie, had been sent from internet protocol addresses at a property owned by Todd Butterbow. Now, Todd Butterbow is a new introduction to this case, isn't he? Because nobody knew who he was really, because essentially Golyar has been having a relationship with Todd. In fact, she's been having a relationship with him since 2010. That's right, guys. The woman who is so desperate to have David in her world, she will do anything to keep him, actually has a side guy, and she's been with him since 2010. She'd met him online just as she'd essentially met David. So they now find this connection with him. Todd, of course, has literally no idea about the relationship that's going on with David. And it turns out that she'd even lived in his house for 2 years with her 2 children. Just imagine coming to terms that you've lived in a house with somebody for 2 years, you've been seeing them in a relationship for a long period of time, and then you find out that she has basically been cheating on you. All the while she has this incandescent rage because David isn't committing to her full time. And during the time that she's actually living there, the emails allegedly from Carrie had been sent from that address. Golyar had even contacted Todd pretending to be Carrie, and she basically contacted him saying that she was a friend of Golyar's. Now, when he checked with Golyar, she confirmed that they were friends. And at no point when she was fabricating that relationship did she suggest that she was being harassed by Carrie. So different threads and different stories to different people. Now, meanwhile, Carrie's Facebook account, from which she appeared to have been making posts and sending messages, just turned out to be an imposter account. So it had basically been created using photographs and information from a genuine Facebook account, but when they looked at it, they could tell it was a fake one. And the forensic digital evidence linked this imposter account to Golyar. Golyar had even taken the same photos and set up online dating profiles in Carrie's name. She had really gone for it on a digital footprint level. She really wanted to create this guise that Carrie was still alive. And she had worked a huge amount of time doing this. Now we get to 2016, it's December, and the police finally arrest Golyar and search her apartment. And what do they find? A very significant item. A black and white floral shower curtain. Remember, one of the items bought on Carrie's debit card? That immediately connects them. Also, they find property that had been taken from Carrie's apartment. So it had a camcorder, a digital camera, memory cards. So she is banged to rights. They now have her fully connected. We've got fingerprints. We've got items that literally been removed from Carrie's apartment. We've got a purchase that's been seen on the debit card. So it is closing in on Golyar. And we get to the 22nd of December 2016, she's charged with Carrie's murder and also one count of arson. And what does she plead? Not guilty. Now, to all of us listening to this right now, we're all like, what? How can you plead not guilty? You literally have everything leading back to you. The only thing you don't have is an enormous red sign that follows you around, just pointing with the words underneath it, she did it. That would be slightly more convincing than what we already have. But aside from that, it seems so obvious that she's clearly the killer. But of course, it's never that simple when the legal realities play out. Because the problem for prosecutors was that all of the evidence was basically circumstantial. There wasn't even a body, and there wasn't proof that Carrie was actually dead. I have to throw it out there though. I'd give it a go. You know what I mean? There are some cases, aren't there, where you're looking and you're thinking, oh, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence there. Often there'll be circumstantial evidence where we think no one should convict with this kind of circumstantial evidence, and that's the right thing. And then there are cases where you're like, is it really circumstantial? Well, it is circumstantial because there's no body. Is it really circumstantial though? I mean, is it circumstantial? Yeah, it's circumstantial. There isn't really evidence to say that she killed anyone. Can I just run through a few things? I don't know. I'm just going to throw it out there. Isn't there literally Carrie's blood in a car that was Carrie's that's been cleaned aside from one thing, which is Golyar's fingerprints? And isn't it that Golyar shot herself, and it's evidence because of the fact that it was basically a gun that had been stolen from her kind of on-off guy's apartment? And hasn't she tried to blame lots of people by orchestrating this scenario where literally she is the main source of contact for all of the harassment? And didn't she set fire to her own house and kill her animals? Are they things that we can kind of prove? Well, we can prove those. Is that really circumstantial? Because that doesn't feel circumstantial. It sounds substantial, not circumstantial. It sounds substantial. Listen, I don't have a qualification in law, but I think I'm going to take this one. I think I'm going to let me just go in the court. I'll buy a nice suit. I'll go in. Let's see how it goes. Seriously, I don't feel it's that circumstantial. I do feel it's relatively substantial. But the defense, of course, they are hoping that it won't play out that way. They actually waive their right to a jury trial, and I'm not surprised because in a jury it would take about 4.5 minutes for them to decide that everything I've just said makes perfect sense. In fact, you wouldn't even need to do anything more than just the paragraph I just reeled off, say that, and they'd be like, yeah, guilty. Let's just go to Costa or Starbucks and chill, because we're all agreed she's guilty as hell. But this is what they do. They waive that right to a jury trial because they want to speed the process up. And the reason for this is they think they've got a hope. Because if they get it in front of a judge before any body is found, it could potentially make it more difficult to find Golyar guilty. We get to February 2017. Now, the prosecution at this point are handed some really crucial evidence, and this crucial evidence really bolsters their case. So, David, who's obviously been through a highly traumatic time, let's remember that. This has been going on for years. And he's all the while thought that Carrie was just somebody who'd lost her mind and was abusive. And now he's realizing that Carrie, that woman that he really liked, that he really connected with, all those feelings that he had about her were correct. And he's been denied that relationship. He's been denied his sense of safety. He's been denied reality for such a long time. So he's gone through these awful times, and I guess he's been racking his brains, and he remembers that he's got this tablet in storage which Golyar had used when they were dating. Now, from that tablet, isn't it amazing the sliding doors moments and how the universe just intervenes at the right times in the right place? It really is a wonderful moment when these occasions occur. The investigators managed to recover a memory card, and on this, they're literally able to retrieve thousands of deleted images and texts. Now, as the tablet didn't actually have the ability to send texts, it was obvious that a memory card had been put in another device at some point. And they soon discovered it was compatible with Golyar's LG mobile phone. So then, of course, they analysed the phone data, and the phone data confirms it's been used in this device. Now, among the deleted images from this time were photos of something wrapped in tarpaulin, taken from different angles. There were also images of what appeared to be parts of a human body. One was of a left foot, and that left foot had a really distinctive tattoo on it, the Chinese symbol for mother. Another was of someone's hip, showing a yin-yang tattoo. Carrie had those tattoos on those parts of her body. And the flesh on the images, well, they showed signs of decomposition. So they were looking at a dead body, and the connections clearly meant that that was Carrie's dead body. Prosecutors firmly believe at this point they have the final evidence they need, if they actually needed it at all, let's be honest. But I mean, it's indisputable, isn't it? They got photographic proof of Carrie's dead body taken on Golyar's mobile phone. And not only had she killed Carrie, this innocent woman, this loving mother, this absolutely cared for daughter, not only had she taken this woman from her family, she'd taken pictures of the body. I mean, we're in Jeffrey Dahmer territory, aren't we? We're in Memento-verse. Can relive the crime again and again. I'm proud of my work. I want to revisit that experience. That's what we're seeing play out there. We get to August 2017. Unsurprisingly, 42-year-old Golyar is found guilty of first-degree murder, also found guilty of second-degree arson, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. That is the correct decision. I mean, thank the Lord that the judge decided to go so harshly on her. She absolutely 100% deserved it. How calculating and manipulative can you be? Now, since her incarceration, it will not surprise you, Golyar has shown no remorse whatsoever. No remorse, no conscience, no compassion, no consideration, no accountability, no responsibility at all for Carrie's death. And despite what can be described as overwhelming evidence of her guilt, she has literally stated that she will carry on fighting to prove her innocence. I would want to ask you, how long are you going to fight to prove your innocence, bearing in mind that you're not innocent and we've got all the evidence that clearly suggests that you're not innocent and you're definitely not going to ever get found innocent? How long are you going to fight? Is that going to be this lifetime? And then, you know, when you take your last breath and you die in your cell and then you're taken down to hell by a really big red kind of devil creature, are you still going to be protesting your innocence at that point whilst you're realising exactly how your dogs and cats felt when they were set on fire? Just throwing it out there. It's just an intrigued point, an interesting point for me to clarify. But no, she's taken absolutely no responsibility. She claims, oh my God, honestly, I don't know why they even entertain these conversations. Seriously, I don't know why they entertain these conversations. I genuinely feel that if somebody starts to say something in prison that suggests they're innocent with overwhelming evidence, somebody should just be walking around, just cover the mouth. You know, shh, 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 just no more, no more, no more. Or some kind of like conditioning behaviour where there's a reality that if you say something, there's a consequence that isn't very nice until it conditions you to just shut up. But yeah, why would she? She just walks around saying that the real killer is still at large. But it's not, is it? The real killer is you. You're in prison for life. Literally you. And you're an animal killer and a human killer. And we don't want to be too cruel, but if you do rot in hell, we won't take a second to be concerned about that reality. So yeah, she didn't do it. Real killer's out there, and that's the main concern, of course, you know. We want to make sure that the real killer is brought to justice. I mean, if there was a real killer out there who could literally do all the things that they did and then project blame onto her, no one's ever going to find them because they would literally be a genius of such a level that they would be completely without any chance of apprehension ever. But of course, we know that's not real because she killed Carrie. And she has the hallmarks, in my opinion, of having the temperament of a serial killer. She's currently incarcerated at the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women, which makes me go, ooh, because I don't like the fact that she is a woman. We just don't expect that from our counterparts and peers of the female orientation. We tend to be more nurturing and loving than that. Though I do cover on this channel a lot of individuals who should have their own group because they are so malevolent internally. This has been a really disturbing case because if you think about it, it begins as a really serious case of stalking and harassment that turns out to just be this cover for murder. Golyar put her love interest and her victim's family through 4 years of hell. It makes Fatal Attraction look like a birthday present, doesn't it? It makes boiling that rabbit seem more like an acceptable reality in such a circumstance in comparison to an actual real life crime that we're talking about. This woman was willing to sacrifice anything and anyone if it got her where she wanted. Golyar wanted to remove any love rival. She wanted to cover up a crime completely. She had no intention of getting caught for this. The extreme narcissism, the pathological lying, also the incredibly manipulative behavior. She exhibited extreme deception for years. She used the fake stalking, the harassment, all to get David back. Whenever their relationship seemed at risk, that was what she did. And they believed that she spent as many as 50 hours a week pretending to be Carrie. Throwing it out there, Golyar, if you just put that into something pro-social, who knows, you could have made a success of your pathetic life. She literally made an occupation of it. She sent tens of thousands of texts and emails. She went to these extreme lengths to hide the crime. She didn't care about the pain. She didn't care about the suffering that she caused in the process. And when David actually talked about Golyar, David said, I want her to go away. Never do this to anybody again. Nancy and Carrie's son were foremost in my mind. They're unfortunately the ones that have to live with these repercussions. And it's true, because whilst obviously David had some feelings towards Carrie, he wasn't in love with her. They weren't exclusive. It was sad. And certainly he's been through the trauma and reality of dealing with all that harassment for years. But he hasn't lost somebody of deep, infinite meaning to him. Nancy and Carrie's son have. They've had a life stolen of infinite meaning, of love, of future, and it's irreplaceable. Carrie's mother, Nancy, described her daughter as a fun-loving, talented and wonderful woman, smart. She said, Carrie was only 37 when she died. If I could talk to Carrie right now, I'd say, I love you. I am so glad that you were in my life. You have a beautiful son who's got a wonderful life coming. And I miss you terribly. What beautiful words from Nancy. Sometimes when people make statements about their loved ones who've been lost, there is a rage, understandably. There is a deep, guttural, cerebral, physical sadness, which again is understandable. But what you hear from Nancy there is just the celebration of who she created. And yeah, the life of Carrie was horribly cut short, and her end was not something that she ever deserved, nor that anybody deserves. But Nancy remembers the life and meaning that was fully loved and lived, and not the end that neither of them had any control over. And I think that's such a testament to an incredible relationship and an incredible woman, because Carrie was an incredible woman, incredibly bright, incredibly kind, incredibly compassionate, incredibly motivated, a successful pro-social human that we should all be proud to have in the world around us. And the fact that Golyar stole that, and why? Because she crossed her in a corridor and decided that somehow she was going to steal a man that she wanted, and she was willing to risk everything to achieve that man, and unsuccessfully. Because the truth was, he was never that invested in Golyar anyway. What a waste. And what a psychopathic, narcissistic mindset to actually go ahead and do what this woman did. All for nothing. Stealing and ruining lives, literally for nothing. The one thing that we can all sleep easy about, though, is that Golyar is never going to walk free. No one's ever going to believe her BS that she's innocent. And Carrie will always be remembered as the loved human being with infinite meaning. Whereas Golyar is likely to just rot away in her cell. And that's not to forget, she had children. They are victims too. They've been robbed of a mother. Because again, when it comes down to it, the only person that Shanna Golyar cared about was Shanna Golyar. And now she's going to have the rest of her life, probably the rest of eternity, to consider just how lonely it is to be Shanna Golyar. Let me know your thoughts on this case. It's one of those that is really mind-boggling. It's incredible to imagine the lengths that some people will go to get what they want and the costs that will occur because of that desire. I'd love to know your thoughts. As ever, I'll be back soon with another true crime. So if you are new to this channel, remember I release my content on a Wednesday and a Sunday. And this is absolutely dedicated to Carrie. She should be bringing up her boy, living her life, happily in love, doing all the things that she deserved. And it was denied. But like I said, at the end of the day, at least justice was served in this case. Take care, guys. Be safe.